Good morning, Sora. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kurt Baumgartner. I'm with Kaspersky's Global Research and Analysis team. I've been a part of the team for years now. Today, we're talking with Sasha. We've been talking with researchers from around the world and about their research, how it impacts the global community. And today we're reviewing a conference presentation that Sasha and I did towards the end of 2021. But before we get into that and we talk about its global impacts, let's real quickly just hear from you, Sasha. Sasha, where were you before Kaspersky? What sorts of research were you working on, and what brought you on the team?
Yeah, before joining Kaspersky, I was working with Semantic Star team. So I was mostly involved with researching botnets, tracking botnets. So my daily job was to hunt for new botnets and then basically tracking them, the top 10 botnets around the world. So that was mostly I was involved with. Then I developed my interest towards tracking these nation state actors. So that's what motivated me to join the grid team.
Nice.
So it's been 2 years. I am with the team. So mostly tracking the threat actors in the APAC region.
Right on, right on. And there is a lot of activity out there, so you must be busy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how about this conference we both presented at? We did a talk on some actors that were targeting critical infrastructure, and there was a supply chain component that I got to talk about. Could you tell me a little more about the conference, or tell everybody a little bit about the conference? It's been running for quite some time. It's actually a pretty big conference. I don't know, what are some of your favorite things about it?
Yeah, so the most important thing about the conference is basically one of the sponsor of the conference is Kerala Police. So Kerala is a southern state in the India. So we get to see a lot of government people attending this conference. So we get a lot of insights as we see from the past conference. We can see most of the keynote speakers are some of the famous government personalities from India. So that's the most exciting thing about the conference. Uh, and we have seen a variety of topics in the conference over the period of year. The conference has improved. Uh, that's what I can say.
Nice. Yeah, it seemed to be run pretty smoothly. Everything was on time, but they had a lot of people and a lot of content to get across, it seemed. So yeah, it was my first conference in India. I kind of wish I could have been there in person, but unfortunately, with COVID and all, that wasn't going to happen. Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about the content for our presentation. We talked quite a bit about threats targeting critical infrastructure in India. Certainly, this isn't the only place in the world where we see this kind of activity and this kind of tooling, in particular, the malware that's being deployed in these networks are certainly actively used around the world. But these findings are definitely very interesting. And I'll talk about my small piece in just a minute, but you talked a bit about some findings you had in telecoms and related organizations. A lot of these were Chinese-speaking actors. Could you talk a little more about that? It was a really interesting find.
Yeah. So it was during the time when U.S. Department of Justice released indictments for APT 41 group. So I started tracking that group from there onwards. And if we see during 2020, that was a period of tension between India and China. So I was specifically interested in tracking the Chinese speaking group. So from there onwards, what I see is I see some of the files, very unusual files belonging to semantic product suite. Uh, so those files were modified, were not original files. So that was the main point of the research. So after following that activity, we see a lot of samples that were specifically tailored to target telecom companies in India. So digging through that activities, we found bunch of compromise in the telecom sector, specifically in India. Then a lot of post-compromise activity, which was very unusual for us because I found a lot of tools that was used in post-compromise stage, and that too in a specific directory. They chose a specific staging directory, which was very common across the victims. Following that post-compromise directory, we also found traces of the previously known Nikon backdoor, but we were not sure that Nikon was behind this. But during the same time, we also see Semantic published a blog where they mentioned one of the backdoor which they tracked as Garfly. Basically, we have also seen that backdoor in our investigation, and the backdoor was basically uh, known to be used by APT41 group. So we believe that this activity was tied to this group.
That's really interesting. You're seeing that crossover because in I forget exactly when our first Nikon public release went out. It must have been back in 2016 or 2017. And then the camera shy report came out, and Nikon activity came to a halt for at least a little bit. And then there seemed to be splinters here and there that were exhibiting quite a bit of activity in the same region. It's either Southeast Asia, Southern Asia, but I could never put my finger on exactly what happened to the Nikon malware and the Nikon activity. But you're saying it's still being recycled and used, the same code,
Yeah.
which is pretty interesting.
So what we believe is that either it's like a shared tool between this group, or it's completely a false flag which they tried to introduce during the investigation. That's what we concluded, because as you rightly mentioned that after 2016 and 17, we haven't seen group very actively doing attacks, at least from our telemetry perspective.
Yeah, not
So
like it was, that's for
yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Yeah.
So we believe either it's a shared tool that we found, the backdoor, or it could be entirely a false flag which actor tried to introduce using
Yeah.
this shared tool. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting stuff and problematic considering it's in telecoms,
Yeah.
which has all sorts of implications once those network assets are at risk in telecoms.
So most of the backdoors which were used in this attack is not new. So we see from the compilation dates. So backdoors were old, uh, but the thing is that they used this hard-coded telecom string in the backdoor, which help us uh, associating this activity with high confidence that in fact they were after the telecom sector.
Yeah, and that's pretty common that we see with either, if you want to call them APT41, WinT, under the WinT umbrella, which I know a lot of people disagree with, but you see a whole mix of malware, whether it's compiled 2017 or it's compiled yesterday, it's all over the board. I think they're just so
Yeah,
highly
yeah,
active that they don't really care what's working in that moment, and what's really being distributed and deployed is, pretty much by the, pretty ad hoc. So yeah, that's definitely characteristic that we see again and again with that particular group. So yeah, I don't think that piece of it, that they aren't deploying the newest malware, is terribly out of character for them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for my part of the presentation, I spoke about a supply chain attack that I had found as a tactic, throughout 2020 and 2021. It was extremely common to see these high level supply chain attacks being used throughout the world. And so unfortunately, I got to present about a particular deployment of PlugX. And this is a component we continue to see everywhere. We talked about it, maybe 10 years ago. And it's been used in some of the sort of the biggest incidents, some of the most problematic incidents over the past decade. So PlugX showed up, for example, in the OPM hack. PlugX has shown up again and again in targeted attacks throughout the world, and it's still being used. For a while, it was almost embarrassing to talk about PlugX, but here we are. We're still talking about it. So yeah, I found it on a deployment server during an event, or I should say a campaign that I called SmudgeX, because it was related to fingerprint scanning software that's being used in South Asia, throughout South Asia, by government employees. So this is particularly problematic because it wasn't seen for quite some time, and supply chain style attacks are especially effective at spraying a large number of unsuspecting target systems, and then from there, attackers can go ahead and pick and choose the more juicy targets, sort of the higher value targets that are popping up out of this, say, batch of systems that they see infected. So yeah, it was another PlugX variant. It wasn't being detected well, at least the dropper, the loader, the payload itself was just like what you're talking about. It's something we've seen before. I think some of the timestamps were from 2019. So this wasn't completely new, but the way it was repacked and the way it was delivered was new and different. So that's something that was of high interest. So I would say, as far as execution, unfortunately, it was really effective at what the attackers were looking for. The actual tool, the malware itself, again, it was PlugX. It was something we've seen for a decade, which is very disappointing to see. So I think defenders have a lot of work as far as maintaining not only development networks that we saw with, Sunburst and SolarWinds, but actually identifying distribution servers and making sure those aren't compromised, better defending them, and identifying when installers are poisoned with Trojans like PlugX, because again, this is something we've seen in multiple incidents. We reported on a half dozen of these throughout Southeast Asia in 2020 and 2021. So, this continues, unfortunately, to be a very sought after tactic, and a lot of effort's been going into setting these up. All right. So there was some interesting technical matter as a part of the reporting and the research you did, Saurabh. Uh, in part, you were talking about these organizations being hit with a Linux backdoor, and that's interesting in itself. It certainly expands the capabilities of the attackers that we're looking at and their interests. So, could you tell us a little more about the Linux backdoor?
Yeah. So speaking of the capability of the backdoor, backdoor was not very complex, but what's interesting is like it operates in passive mode. So it will sit on your system, but it will not do anything unless and until it is instructed by its operator. Uh, so we were contacted by one of our partners, telecom partners. They shared some of the files with us regarding this backdoor. So we started looking for the similar samples in our telemetry. We found a bunch of samples belonging to this backdoor. So another interesting thing which we found is the authentication mechanism. So over the period of time, they have improved this. They started with the plain text, and then they used this hash-based authentication, where they basically calculate MD5 of a particular string to authenticate themselves. So it's not easy to take over the backdoor if someone finds the password. So that's the protection mechanism they have introduced. So they try to camouflage their process with the known processes. So that's what we have also seen when the samples were initially shared with us. There were a bunch of legit files as well with this malicious files. So we managed to crack some of the hashes, and uh, from our side, we did a internet-wide scanning of this small backdoor, which we named as Nidu Pick. During our internet-wide scanning, we found out that there are a bunch of other telecom operators which are infected by this. So this is like purely based on the stuff which we scan. We cannot confirm from the victim side whether they were uh, affected with this or not. And what we see is we found the source code of this backdoor on the public malware forums where people usually submit files, but we could not associate this backdoor with any known actors uh, up till now. So we are still investigating the activity, but we still see files popping up from different countries on these platforms related to this backdoor.
Yeah, that's really interesting stuff that they added this capability. I mean, this is the kind of thing we've seen in the sort of the highest profile actors, the most sophisticated groups deploy these kinds of passive, or have deployed these kinds of passive nobody but us listeners on networks so that they can come back to their target in their time and maintain persistence. And in Linux environments, that works pretty well. It seems like once a Linux server is up, it stays up. It isn't going to change a whole lot. They kind of know they know the game here. So yeah, that was a really interesting finding, and unfortunate that you're seeing it everywhere. I shouldn't
Yeah.
say everywhere, seeing it
So
in multiple locations.
Yeah, so initially, when we started investigating this, so as I mentioned earlier, that this backdoor is like really simple. So the whole objective is to obtain a shell so that they can run a bunch of commands on the infected machine. So nothing in terms of capabilities in this backdoor, but still they managed to be under radar for this activity. Yeah.
Yeah, maintain
And
access. That's
we managed to do internet-wide scanning because during our hunting we found the client which was developed by the actor to control this backdoor. So we get to see a bit of understanding of the protocol that is, or the special packet that is being crafted to activate the backdoor. That's how we managed to perform our internet-wide scanning, because we found the client of this backdoor as well.
Yep. Interesting findings, Sasha. That's some good work. All right. So as we're wrapping things up, I want to mention that the technical details, all the reverse engineering, the research, indicators, Yara that helps you detect, defenders detect this kind of stuff on networks. This is all stuff that can be accessed on our tip. The link should be online, but our threat intelligence portal is full of some pretty incredible research that you'll want to get access to. You can always get a trial subscription for a time to download a limited set of the reporting indicators in Yara, and to follow up on some of the things, whether it's SmudgeX or the Linux backdoor, those interesting things that we talked about earlier. So that's it from me. Sasha, thanks for the discussion.
Thanks, Kurt.
All right, and I hope we can do another presentation at Cocoon this coming year.
Yeah, sure. I hope the event will be offline too this time.
That would
And
be
not
great.
to forget SAS as well.
That's right. All right. Thanks, guys.